are going to find out. David Sneyd is with us. David, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well, good morning.
I was allowed to flick at various stages during the game. He was flicking as well.
I know, yeah, I was listening on the way in. Yeah, you were flicking between your NFL and you were between your snooker.
Had to be done.
I know, yeah.
It was difficult.
Yeah, it was. There's no getting away from it. Like, it kind of, if you look back, I was kind of thinking back to the first half of the Norway game, and that was really, really disappointing, and kind of just like I mentioned it in my kind of report on the game, kind of a bit just tepid. It was just very kind of almost lackadaisical how we were passing the ball, and then against Malta, you're kind of just hoping for it. I was saying it before, just a bit of a reaction and a bit of kind of just a bit of pace and upping it a little bit, and it wasn't really there. And but then I was like, when you had me notes at the end of the first half, there were still little moments that were created in the final third that they just couldn't see off or couldn't finish off. And you're kind of, I was kind of just even thinking about it last night and then again this morning. I was like, it's the kind of game that Ireland have been involved in a fair bit over the last little while, and you're kind of thinking, well, what's been different? And you were kind of looking for that little bit of creativity and a bit more of a spark, because that's what the whole premise for the last couple of years has been about, trying to find a different way of playing. And it was still a lot of the same struggles. But then on another night, you could go into that game at half time 2-0 up, and maybe it gives a bit of a different complexion. It's just about having that little bit of clinical nature in the final third when it did come, because there was a couple of moments where opportunities could have been like really scored, really.
Yeah. Okay, so we gave you the very difficult task of picking three players who had impressed over the two games. I mean, maybe the criteria are a bit...
But even the nature of the games, like the players, so obviously in terms of who impressed, like Callum O'Dowd was one of them. But then I still thought there were still moments where he was very disappointing. So he just had those flashes. Obviously, he had that burst of pace, and that's something that Stephen Kenny has spoken about, especially in those wing back positions that he wants. That's why he's kind of name checked Neil Ferrugia of Shamrock Rovers, because he wants to have that little bit of explosiveness in wing back positions. And I think something like that will stand out. I think you can obviously mention it as well, the fact that coming on as a sub and having that burst of pace and hits the post, those little moments I think will stand out for him as well. And like something like in a game like that against Malta, that's what sticks in the head.
Yeah,
like, it's nothing spectacular.
Okay,
there's no one kind of saying, do you know what, I was the main man over these two games and really like dominated or whatever.
Maybe that's a better way for us to have this kind of, to frame this conversation. What's Kenny looking for from these games? Because like obviously he wanted 2 wins. He's got a defeat and a win, and I think they'll be disappointed with what happened against Norway. But ultimately these games don't matter. Right, in the long cycle of when we come back to look at the Kenny era, we're not going to go, those two friendlies, you know, when the World Cup was on and everyone was not really paying that much attention, they're the ones that stick out in my mind. It'll be something else.
Yeah, I think that's the way people would be thinking it from the outside, I suppose. But if you're in there, like Stephen Kenny would be looking at it thinking, well, like Will Smallbone, for example. Like I know people are saying, well, why didn't he get a run? But like, Kenny kind of brought him into the squad to have a look at him. Didn't give him game time, but he did that. He did that with Callum O'Dowd when Callum O'Dowd came back in the previous get together for this, and he kind of name checked him, wanted to just get him involved and get him in the mix and just see how he was around the place again, having not really.
So they don't hothouse players, you know, they don't throw them in without a full understanding of
kind of, yeah. And even if you go back to, like, I agree with you in the sense that like the results, if Ireland had a loss last night, there would have been recriminations, definitely, without a doubt. And so it's not a case of like these games will be pinpointed, but there could be little things within them that for Stephen Kenny would be important. You know what I mean? So like if you even go back, you go back to as far back to say the summer before last. Summer before last when they had played Andorra and they got the first win, and it was the first kind of time they had a bit of a training camp and stuff together. And like after that, you're hearing about players who are kind of standing up a little bit and are actually kind of having a good impact around the place. And Kenny kind of is able to impose his personality a little bit on the squad. So there's stuff that happens, say, behind the scenes, and that's stuff that you'll find out with, say, Will Smallbone. I wouldn't be surprised with someone like Will Smallbone if he goes back and plays well for Stoke and is playing games, playing regularly, even though he wasn't involved. I think if he's made a good impression around the place and how he settled in, he could be in the mix for March. And if you look at how Stephen Kenny treated, I would say, Michael Obafemi, even when you look at the whole point of like when he pulled out of a squad because he felt as if he wasn't fit enough to play and didn't want to be involved, and they were the friendlies with, I think it was Lithuania, wasn't I? Remember the start of the year, and just how he dealt with that, he kind of reintroduced them then, and then obviously it paid off because he'd done so well against Scotland. They're the positives. They're kind of scratching around for thinking, well, what's the benefit of the last couple of games? And that's probably the height of what you can get from it, because the games themselves and how Ireland played and what you would expect and where you would expect Ireland to be at this point of playing, it's probably not where you would expect them to be or where you would want them to be.
Do we give Stephen Kenny any leeway for the fact that Omabamidele, Jason Knight, Parrott, these lads weren't involved in these friendlies? Like, there's players there who might have made a difference.
But that's going to happen. That's international football.
That's fair.
Come March, those 3 lads could not be available again. There could be other players, like if, heaven forbid, like if Josh Cullen's not available.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's going to be a big issue. And I know Stephen Kenny referenced the kind of depth of the central defenders, and that's it's significant there. That's actually a good thing. The Troy Parrott, that's probably one disappointment in terms of not being able to see in this window would be to continue with Obafemi and Troy Parrott together. Just because that was a partnership that obviously Kenny was beginning to formulate a little bit, done well against Scotland, home and then away. Again, opportunities, like when you think back to Troy Parrott's opportunity when he was 1-on-1, you're thinking, oh God, like if that, they could have had a totally different complexion on how the year ended. But I think that's just the nature of international football. You'd be a very lucky manager to have your best team available all the time, especially for a team like Ireland. And it's just about having that structure in place where lads can drop in and hopefully be able to do a job within it.
So that's the point of Smallbone coming in, seeing how the squad works. If you end up playing, you'll be playing in that role or this role, so you need to keep an eye on those, and you're not overwhelmed by this. And then when you do come in, pick you this time.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's it. Like, and in fairness, Kenny has spoken about that, and you speak to people around it. That's kind of what he wants to do. You know what I mean? And it's also the whole point of, I know people were saying even like on the coverage about like when Jeff Hendrick, it always seems to be someone like Jeff Hendrick or whoever comes on, and people are saying, why is that? Because it's clear that's probably now going to be Jeff Hendrick's role for Stephen Kenny, and he wants to see how he does in terms of a fella coming. He's no longer going to be first choice in that starting 11. He's going to be that experienced head coming on for 15 minutes. So like, it's not. But like, we've seen so much change over the last couple of years. This isn't now what's coming for the next little while. We couldn't have an idea of what the 11 is going to be, and these are the kind of the first.
How does he respond to being a sub?
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean. Like an experienced player, is he gonna throw a bit of a wobbler and not put a shift in? And like that's just the nature of international football again. Like, it's the fellas' roles and how they are in the team change, and that's how Kenny has to manage it. And that's what he's probably been looking for, because you would imagine come March time, depending on who's fit, that'll be someone like a Jeff Hendrick's role.
Okay, the other players you mentioned for picked out for moments rather than impressed. Is that what we're saying this?
That's fair, isn't it? Like, there was no one really, was there? Like,
no, there wasn't. So Alan Brown's next on your list, obviously. Scored a great goal. Alan Brown is always, it feels like, on the verge of being a really, really important player for us, but hasn't quite stepped into that bit where he's nailed on to start, first choice. He's going to influence games.
And he does, though. That's the thing. He has an ability to affect games in the final third in terms of getting into the box. When I mentioned at the start about little moments in the first half that could so easily have been a goal, like, it was him getting on the end of Doherty's little flick through the nutmeg in right on half time. Like, he's the one who kind of seems to have that, not so much the licence to do it, but just the actual awareness and ability to actually pick runs and get into the box. Like, you go back to the game against Belgium, Summerswell, where he did it there, where he got the equaliser there, and he scored. Wasn't it the first game of the previous campaign under Kenny, with the Serbia away to Serbia with a header? Like, he's capable of getting in the box, and when you are relying on trying to get goals from as many different places as possible, those little moments where you can see him bursting in and like doing that's going to, again, should stick in the manager's mind, because you need as many players as possible who can affect games in the box. Yeah, okay. Jamie McGrath? Just because he had so much energy about him, he looked comfortable on the ball, and again, another player who is coming back into it, having, like, when you look at where he was after making his debut again the Portugal game in Faro, and how things seemed to be going for his career, it looked as if he was only going one way, that this was the building blocks to possibly, not so much maybe becoming a Premier League player, but maybe decent championship level, and then the move to Wigan, just disaster. Nightmare for him, absolute nightmare. Probably at the worst possible time for him, because obviously Wigan were flying in League One and the manager didn't want to change it. He's had to go back to Scotland, but then loses his place completely in the squad from a position where he was actually, you're thinking he's in the team here, and then he's not in the squad. And again, in terms of positives, just the reaction that he had, I suppose, coming back in, and like anyone who knows him, obviously he would have been around the League of Ireland, but he's just like a good person, and he's a good fella. Like, I'd say he's one of those players who wouldn't have got into a squad and thinking, this is where I am now, and regardless, I think he would have understood why he wasn't in the squad. Where did he play last night? See, he seen that probably more so off the left in terms of on that. Like, there was a couple of little moments. He was obviously on set pieces on that side. There was a couple of little moments of nice intricate play where he was on that side. He knocked in a nice little cross for the back post actually for Matt Doherty that led to that chance for Alan Brown. But he was kind of drifting a little bit. Again, this is where I think he has plenty to offer. So long as he's actually playing football. Now that he's playing, I think he'll stay in. I can't see him not. Is that he can kind of. It's what I suppose what's the term, like bit of fluidity or whatever in formation. Like he can be on that, say, on the left side of a three in midfield, or even if you can drop back as a two because he's just so technical on the ball. Yeah. But then if you need him as a bit of a 10, if you need to float him off as a almost kind of playing off a striker, he can do that as well. But like yesterday, he seemed to do a lot. Last night he seemed to do a lot of kind of the damage, more so kind of on the left side essentially, which is where he was when he made his debut against Portugal. And was
so this is
terrific.
a depth piece for Ireland if he's playing regularly, that will compete with
Jason
with
Knight, I would imagine.
Malumbi
yeah,
a bit.
Yeah, I think Malumbi
They'll be ahead of him.
Yeah, well, see, Malumbi is different in the sense that he's sort of maybe more so someone who could almost be alongside Cullen a bit deeper. If you were having him a bit further forward, I don't think he gives you the same level maybe of just control and possession as a Knight or Jamie McGrath. He just gives you that little bit of aggression and a bit more energy and a bit like in the Scotland game during the summer when
a lot of aggression.
Like yeah. But you know what? Like
we need it.
Like that was Ireland's best performance of the year, and again something like that can't be forgotten as well. You know what I mean? Like that's especially at home in front of those fans. Like that's what they kind of respond to. It's like Stephen Kenny referenced that after the game that Norway paid. For some reason he was asked a couple of questions about the Norway game after the Malta game last night, and he was saying Norway paid Ireland a bit more respect because he sees Ireland as a bit more of a possession based team now. But it's more so a case of teams know what they can do against Ireland now, that they can just sit in because that's
what are you going to do with it
exactly. Do you know what I mean? Whereas
so it's actually less respect in a way.
No, it's just not so much less respect. I thought it's just kind of, it's just like from saying, well, this is what we can do. Like this is very easy to deal with. Do you know what I mean? And I would say you're looking at a combination of you need to have that level of control and passing and being able. You just need it in football now. But you also with Ireland, a lot of the strengths are still in that just little bit of nastiness and a little bit of aggression that brings a lot more out of some of the players in that squad. The
three disappointing players, David, that quote unquote disappointing, but Gavin Bazunu, like I thought at the start of the game,
he's finished. He's gone.
He's gone. He's finished. He's brutal. Yeah. Like his distribution was actually okay at the start of the game, and then there was a couple of nervy moments, and you're thinking, this is very un-Gavin Bazunu like.
Yeah, that was it. Do you know what? That was my thinking exactly, Shane. Yeah, like I was just thinking, this wasn't the Gavin Bazunu that you've been used to seeing in terms of just a couple of shaky ones, like that simple pass out to Josh Cullen in the first half against Norway, and I think I can't remember who the chance fell to, but if it's Haaland, it's a goal. Like, you know, and there was that, and then there was a moment where the cross came in, and he kind of stuttered, he kind of checked, kind of second guessed himself and came out when the ball kind of just bouncing off the chest, and it was just that little bit of hesitation that hadn't been there. Now in the second half he made a couple of good saves, and it was like he kind of what you would expect. That's what I'm saying about, like, even with the lads who impressed, you're just picking out. This is what managers are going to do, isn't it? This is what coaching staff will do. They're going to just pick out those little moments, because like I was at the Man City Southampton game earlier in the season when it was obviously, say, Haaland against Bazunu, and it could have been 8 or 9-0 if it wasn't for Gavin Bazunu. But the thing that stood out again, even in that Southampton team, was just the nature of how he was commanding that defence, and there was lads dropping their heads. Like, I think after Haaland's goal, which I think made it 3-0, a couple of the Southampton defenders had collided with each other trying to close them down. Both of them ended up on their backside, and Bazunu was like a doorman lifting the two of them up by the neck to say, come on lads, get back up. And then him and Ward-Prowse, obviously he's the captain, the two of them were in quite a lot of dialogue throughout the game in terms of trying to keep their heads up here a little bit, and that was quite telling in the sense of how he seemed to be actually organised. And so when I speak about Bazunu disappointing, it's just because you just expect him now to be faultless. That's probably why you can think any little kind of maybe sense of vulnerability, you're going to think that's not like him, which is it's harsh, but listen, you just asked me to do it, so
also on your list are Egan and Obafemi.
Well, Egan, because he lost Ostergaard for the goal, like, so easily. Like, I don't think there was much of a check for the goal in terms of the run. I don't think, like, that was extremely disappointing for him, because again, similar to Bazunu, you just don't expect it from him. He's very good. Seems to be very good at commanding that box and being organised and not getting caught in the hop like that. So then that was that, and then Obafemi, just because you're kind of looking for something different. I kind of reference this in again that piece of it after. You're kind of looking for something a little bit different from him, where you kind of senses how a game is going. This is in the Norway game, and he didn't really adapt to it. And you're kind of, that's perfectly fair because he's 22 years old. He's rebuilding his career in the Championship, having burst through at Swansea. He's had his injury issues, blah blah blah. But then you're kind of, that's just another little indication that there's still a fair bit to go in his progression, and you just hope that at club level he continues to play regular football. So when it does come to those days with games with Ireland, he's just going to learn from it and have that bit of experience. Like he's been he's been probably the standout in terms of for excitement for Ireland this year. But that was probably a bit of a disappointing end to the year for him, I'd say.
You'd be surprised to hear there's a lot of negativity in our YouTube comments this morning from people who've watched Ireland over the last 2 weeks, particularly around the manager. So the referendum on the manager is wow. It's always a massive overreaction. Like again, I do think that ultimately what happens in the qualifying campaign is going to decide whether or not we think of the Kenny era as a success or failure.
Absolutely.
And that's harsh because the draw is horrific. But them's the breaks. And what's your assessment of where we are at the moment?
Of where we are, I'd say it's an interesting one. Because it's going into this campaign, it's just it's like what you said there about the referendum. Like, I don't know, it's very tough to kind of judge. Maybe that in itself is a bit of an indictment of still don't know 100% what's going to happen, because the draw is very bad and all the rest of it, and extremely tough. And even this, if you look at these two friendly games, it's kind of a bit of a microcosm of what the year has been, where it's been moments. Like in terms of sustained, there was a good half against Scotland away from home, and that was like very, very positive. But then the nature of how the second half finishes, nothing's really being sustained. There's been some elements of progress. There's still been some signs where you're like, this isn't working in terms of, I would say, well, I know it was said, but the set pieces against, like, that's against Norway, but like, you just can't do that at international football at any level. To be caught on the hop in the nature they did with those two set pieces, and it could be harsh, but like, you're just going to get killed. And like teams like France and the Netherlands, they're not going to be relying on set pieces. They have those threats.
Also have that.
They will also have that as part of their harmony. But then it's just been, I just feel as if the campaign, you're hoping everything over the course of a couple of years of work where Kenny has been working with these players, that it does click and come together. And I say click, and it kind of seems a bit ambiguous, but you're just thinking, because there has been some signs of, you know what, how Ireland have been able to play away from home and also at times at home, just being able to sustain it and get that mix of what we were saying earlier about having that aggression but also keeping that level of control. Now it's asking a lot, because there's still that point of, there's still a lot of players there who are just naturally inconsistent, and that's the reason where they are in their careers with clubs. So it's how do you kind of work a system whereby you just find that consistency. And at international level, it's even more difficult, you know. So short answer, I'll be honest, and maybe it is a bit of a sorry, you don't know what to expect really in March. Like, there's been, again, the Portugal game, Serbia game, they've done well in games against better teams, but you're kind of still thinking, well, what's going to happen? And you know, that's just the honest.
How do you feel the core fans are leaning, David? Like, is it a 50-50 split when it comes to the Kenny question, or is there a definite, you know, the die-hard Irish fans go to every single game? Do you feel like there's a way in which they're leaning at the minute? I
don't know, like, well, there was 700 travelling fans in that match yesterday. Like, that's an indication in terms of, I would say a hardcore of, obviously they're still buying into the team. I know obviously I wasn't there last night, and you see some of the lads who were there obviously covering it. There was like a few boos maybe at half time just because of the nature of the performance. Like, I would say the Norway game being in the crowd, obviously in the crowd for that one, there wasn't like mutiny happening. Like, there was disappointment. It was subdued, but maybe that's because of the friendly as well. Like, I kind of go back to use that at the Serbia game in the qualifiers when Ireland came back and got that late draw, and I was thinking at that point, the crowd, the energy that the crowd gave the team, but also that was on the back of maybe some great saves from Bazunu, but I think it was also because they saw how the team was playing. Like, that energy, I don't think it's maybe still at that same level. Like, I'll be honest, I don't really go off social media and the comments. Like, some of the articles I put up online, I made the mistake a couple of times of looking at comments and you're like, oh my god, like, why do I even do this job? What is the point? Do you know what I mean? But I think there's been enough. I think there's been enough kind of sporadic signs of performances where it's actually looked very coherent and players buying into it and understanding that you would think, you know what, there should be enough goodwill there within that group that it could click in the qualifiers. The problem is it's been such a tough draw that regardless, Ireland could play absolute perfect games in some of those games and still get nothing in them.
Yeah.
So that's what
I think if that happens, like if France beat us 2-1 and we play really well, you'd have to say most Irish fans are reasonable enough to go, well, that was a good performance.
Yeah, that's it. And see, that's part of the element I would say in terms of where I'm a bit conflicted is in the sense that, like, when Stephen Kenny took the job, obviously he came in and maybe he made it all for his own back, because he came in not so much promising a revolution, but saying things are going to change in terms of the style, in terms of the performances, and in terms of how Ireland do things. And it's happened to a degree, but then when you have performances like last night and against Norway, people are saying, well, hold on, this isn't what we all signed up for. So that's where people can come back to it. So it's the whole thing of, well, if results are the only thing that matter, but then last night, let's move on, it's grand, not a bother. But the whole point is that it's not, because where the Irish football is and where or I think a lot of people who are invested in Irish football want is to be able to see a consistency of change of how Ireland do play and how they operate. But it's I think it's at the start of that whole process still.
Yeah, that's
do you know what I mean? And it might not be Stephen Kenny further down the line who maybe really sees the benefits of it, but it has to start somewhere. Yeah. And I just think you just have to. It's not a case of sticking with it. Like, football has changed, and you have to. It's moving with it. Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. Like, I'm not just saying. Like, I did an interview with Robbie Brady about this a couple of weeks, last week, and he made the point as well. He just said, like, what do people want? Do they want us to be backs against the walls, fighting for our lives every single game against every single team? Yeah, and like, I know Jay Lamar, but it was great. He just said, listen, nobody's shite anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, Shane.
You know, like, no one is. Like, in terms of systems, you're coming up against teams who can be rigid and frustrate you. And the nature of where Ireland are at, they haven't got, at the moment, the calibre of players who, as a whole, not just individuals, but as a whole, who can win, say, a 3 or 4.
But do we not have a calibre of player that's above Malta?
But, for sure. That's why Ireland won the game. That's why Ireland won the game, and in the game we're comfortable, other than a couple of moments on the counter. Like, Ireland dominated the ball. Do you know what I mean? It's not as if, like, there was games not too long ago when Ireland were getting absolutely bossed by Georgia home and away. Like, that's not going to happen now to the same degree. Like, Georgia, again, another team they've got one of the most exciting players now in European football in, well, Cravadonna, that's what he's called, isn't he? But like, but what I'm saying is that that's what's changed. One good thing that's changed, I think, under Stephen Kenny now with Ireland is that seeing Ireland being absolutely bossed and outclassed by teams home and away isn't going to happen. But it's that next step of being able to just consistently do that and still win. Do you know what I mean? Like,
that concern I have is, you know, when you say if we lose 2-1 to France and play well, I think there'll be a little bit of empathy there for Stephen Kenny. I almost feel like it's at the level now next March where it's entirely down to results. Like, and I accept that. Like, if
I agree with you. No, I agree with you.
Like, if we lose 2-1 to France and play really, really well, and we lose the next game, he's gone regardless. And I'd feel sorry for him because performance against France is.
I'm not sure if he'd be gone.
No, I don't think.
But I agree with you. No, but
the surge would be like.
No, but I agree. I agree with you now. Where it is actually, from the outside point of view, and for all the people, maybe even fans nowadays, like, they said, you know what, we've seen what you're trying to do in terms of changing it. You've seen them with the players you've brought in and given chances to players who may be being eased out of it. That's all been great. But no, 100%. Like, I think everybody here, like, of course, you're going to take beating France 1-0 if it's absolutely brutal, no matter how it happens. Do you know what I mean?